Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, Kieran O'Connor. Welcome to the final podcast of the year, the Braver Angels holiday special, roundtable edition with John Wood Jr., April Cornfield, Monica Guzman, and our newest guest and newest Braver Angels leader, Gabby Timmis, who will be joining Braver Angels officially in January to lead our social media. Gabby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Karen. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we are all very excited to have you. On today's podcast, we wanted to have a spirited discussion about some of the news of the day, some of the issues that folks across the country have been thinking about and talking about and arguing about at the Thanksgiving table. And then we also wanted to have a bit of a year in review, talk about the year that was at Braver Angels and all that we accomplished, and then end on the year to come, 2023, which is going to see the Braver Angels National Convention in July at Gettysburg College. So, first topic of the day, Elon Musk. Elon Musk, as some of you may know, is the richest man in the world, the CEO of Tesla, and recently the head and owner of Twitter. He's a very controversial figure. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions on Elon, including myself. I want to start with John, because I know, John, you tend to like Elon, although maybe you have a couple quibbles with some of his recent behavior. What comes to mind when you think about Elon Musk?
Well, your doppelganger. That's what comes to mind. People who don't know Kieran don't know that he's frequently compared aesthetically, visually, to Elon Musk. I don't think that's such a bad thing.
It's true.
Yeah,
It's true.
If I were Elon, I would be flattered to be compared to Kieran O'Connor in the looks department. So
that is the response that I should now give when people say I look like Elon Musk. I should be like, Elon Musk looks like me. Don't get it twisted.
You could also say, when people say you look like Elon Musk, that like, oh, I look like $200 billion or something like that. So there you go.
Zing! By the way, I feel obligated to interrupt real quick and just say that as of days ago, a guy named Bernard Arnault is the richest person in the world. So he has dethroned Elon Musk, and he's French, and I think he's connected with Louis Vuitton. Anyway, continue, John. Continue.
Well, Elon did just spend a lot of money on something, right? No, look, I like Elon Musk. I mean, I'm historically sort of a fan, and I like Elon because he's an incredibly, goodness gracious, man has impacted the globe in a remarkable way, just as an innovator, an entrepreneur, somebody who's literally trying to sort of expand sort of the bounds of our collective human imagination and potential. I mean, talking about sending us to Mars and all of that. And I think that in addition to that, I appreciate the fact that he has been concerned with free speech and our ability to sort of communicate effectively in American democracy and not be deranged by social media. I guess the question is Elon Musk, who, by the way, I think has sort of, at least temporarily, replaced Donald Trump as like the biggest lightning rod in America, which is crazy to see, and the biggest lightning rod on Twitter specifically. And he's funny. He's got a funny Twitter personality himself. But is he helping the discourse in the way he's running Twitter? I'm hopeful. I mean, I think that he's loosening things up in a way that I sympathize with, in terms of not being perhaps as censorious. On the other hand, I think that he's leaning into the politics of things in a way that makes it harder for us to depolarize. I don't need Elon Musk personally to be on Twitter saying we should prosecute Anthony Fauci. I think that him disclosing Twitter's previous practices that may be of concern to people who do not want to imagine major social media companies colluding with the government is not a bad thing. But when Musk himself was president or CEO of Twitter, put some stuff forward with political opinions that are hot, right? I don't think that helps anything. So that's my concern about Elon.
Right. And I think I should say that Elon did not just say that we should prosecute Fauci. He tweeted, "My pronouns are prosecute Fauci."
Which,
And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I think definitely some folks in the trans community didn't find that very funny. I have some thoughts on Elon in response to you, but first I want to turn to Gabby. Obviously, Gabby, you're going to be our social media director, and you're probably spending more and more time on social media, so I can sympathize with you. How do you feel about Elon and what John just said? Where do you kind of shake out on this?
Elon, he's a person that I don't have too harsh of feelings in one direction or the other. I think the main thing I think about when I think about Elon is like I grieve the loss of the interesting conversations we could be having in place of now we're having them all about Elon and his personality. There's so much to talk about when it comes to free speech and tech regulation and all of that. So I always get kind of frustrated when it comes to like just a person's personality and how they show up in the world. I'm just pro substantive, interesting conversations. And, sometimes I almost wonder if we should be telling these figures that talking about them is a bit boring, because I think that might be the most compelling way to get through. I'm just personally a little bit like bored of, the character driven political dialogue. I'd rather get into the grittiness of the issues. So that's what
I feel like we all agree with that, but like personality is also the thing that everybody wants to pay attention to also,
It can be an entry point, you just like start with Elon Musk, but then you head into the fraught ground of free speech absolutism, which is a term I think he popularized that is in my head a lot, like free speech absolutism. I think growing up learning about free speech, I thought that free speech was always absolute. But now it appears that because things are so complicated in the last several years, it's not. Now there's degrees of free speech. Now there's degrees. And there's such a thing as being a free speech absolutist, which I know means Trump should have never been kicked off Twitter. Everyone should be able to say anything they want with just very, very few rare exceptions. And it's just, I think it's really interesting that has cracked open from my youth when free speech was very binary. There's either free speech or there isn't. And now there's degrees.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. The first thing I was going to say, maybe apart from John, who seems preternaturally able to just maintain a cheery and honorable disposition on Twitter, it seems like it kind of melts people's brains. And it seems like Elon Musk, who is ostensibly running Tesla, as well as SpaceX, as well as a couple other companies, is spending a significant amount of his time on Twitter tweeting. And increasingly his tweets seem just sort of the kind of the own the libs variety. And I don't deny that he's funny in sort of a obnoxious way. But I fear, as Gabby said, that it kind of distracts a little bit from the real issues. And, ironically, Elon Musk is not a free speech absolutist. Now that he owns Twitter, you break it, you buy it. He recently had to ban Alex Jones. He banned Kanye West. He is confronting the realities of what it means to actually be in charge of the public square. I don't know how I feel about our supposed public square being owned by the richest man in the world. It seems like sort of a sad and inevitable consequence of capitalism. But I think he's running up against the hard reality and the fact that like free speech is protected by the First Amendment, although there are exceptions to that as well. Can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't incite violence. Twitter is a private company. And where does one draw the line, right? April, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this because you run Braver Angels debates, which in themselves are a public square and have structures and have rules. What do you think about all of this? And if you were running Twitter, no pressure, how might you think of, free speech absolutism with the need to police it a little bit and set up some rules and regulations to actually make it a true public square?
Yeah, well, the first thing is if I get to run the public square, I want that salary. That sounds great. And I assume that eventually, if I keep running Brave Red Angels debates, that's where we're going. So this is definitely my my strategy for
April, you shouldn't give away the conspiracy. So
yeah, there is that. Yeah, well, so the I have a thought on Elon Musk himself, and also a thought on the sort of free speech question. And I really agree with you, Mani, that it's the personality has got to be a way in. But man, if that's where we stop the conversation, to what you were saying, Gabby, like, come on, like, surely we can do better than that. And I actually think that, interestingly, a lot of the conversations that are ostensibly about personality are about these deeper issues. They're just sort of veiled. And that's, so I think that the free speech conversation is one of, I would say, one of the three most important conversations happening in the country right now, and that it has been for about maybe 10 years. And I think that the sensation on particularly the right that speech is policed at every turn is a major driver of some of the reactionary sentiment that we see. And also that the pressures to do some of that sort of limiting of speech or just what I think is fundamentally happening is that certain groups, and for reasons many of which are justified, are trying to force social norms to evolve faster than they actually can easily. And so what that amounts to is, right, so a norm is like a social law. It's not an enforceable law. It's like a social, like, we're going to shun you if, right? And so the, again, mostly on the left, there is a set of groups that have been saying the way that we're going to change society and our lives and pursue justice is we're going to, we've done a lot of the changing of structural laws and statutes. Now we're moving on to cultural laws, which are social norms. And the problem is that, just like structural laws, like actual statutes, you can't change somebody's heart or their deep beliefs with a law, like social or otherwise. And so I think that that's why, so I actually think that this is central to the tension that's some of the deep things that are playing out in America right now. And then to the question of, like, you sort of teed me up perfectly there, predicted me there, Kieran, with regard to, so I run a program where we are pretty close to free speech absolutism in the sense that there are almost no words you could say on a debate floor that I would sanction. Yes, we could maybe come up with some edge cases, but what I actually end up sanctioning is tone, because if people say sincerely, like, I just really don't know if authoritarianism might actually be better for us, like, oh, you are, that's where you're coming with, and, like, I don't want to forbid those thoughts, right? But if somebody, there are lots of different ways to say this. There are lots of different ways to say this stuff, and so basically, I think that if I were running Twitter, I would try to make it like Brave Angels debates, which is to say, I would set up some. I agree that it's great that we are uncensoring, especially some of the voices on the right that have been shut out. But I think that the right, the actual solution to the way that they engage is to structure the tool such that the conversation is more productive, and that Twitter has absolutely the capacity to do that. And so I wish they would do it. And my thought on Elon Musk himself is that for a while I was wondering if he was, like, sort of secretly trying to, like, take down Twitter from the inside, and that might be public service given the way that it's currently structured. I don't actually think he's doing that. But I think the last thing I need to say about Elon is that it might be that many Braver Angels members don't know that Kieran was Elon for Halloween. And so I suggest that the thumbnail for this podcast episode be Kieran in his Halloween costume.
I approve mightily. That would be.
How would that be different than Kieran just walking around on any other day? No.
That would be made uglier. Didn't we talk about that?
Anyway. There is that. I love, April, that you said what you said, because I was thinking in my head as we were talking that it's so interesting to think about how reds and blues view everything going on with Twitter very differently. Yes. I've got a lot of folks on the left who are friends of mine going, why are you still on Twitter? you should go on this Mastodon thing. We're all us cool kids who don't want harm and horror are going to go over there. You should come. And so I'm hearing that. I'm exaggerating for effect, but I'm hearing some of that, like this fear that oh, Twitter was wonderful and now it's going to suck. But I'm a little more of like, no, it's kind of sucked for a while, you guys. Like, if you happen to agree with some of the dominant strains, then maybe you thought it was great, but it hasn't really been a true public square where the norms are let's welcome everybody, I think, ever. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I also want to quickly kind of cite Jonathan Haidt's essay in The Atlantic from earlier this year. It was a really impactful essay in the world of social media and social psychology. And he argued that social media has made us structurally stupid. And he said that one of the ways that has happened is that social media has given everybody a little dart gun, and all we do really is shoot little darts at each other. And it's just made us dumb. It's made it so that true dissent and interesting ideas in a good tone, to your point, April. I mean, there's no such thing as a good or bad tone on Twitter. What people do is they hear the words in the tone they project. If they don't like the idea, they'll give it a horrible tone. And that's the way they'll hear it. So we don't have actual voices there anyway. Like, a voice has tone. So yeah, I think Twitter's been problematic for a long time. And so my thing with Elon and this whole thing is, frankly, to kind of sit back and be like, well, I hope whatever breaks gives us the opportunity to build it back better.
So,
it's funny.
Oh.
Yeah.
We might be going to say the same thing, John. I don't know. But on a hopeful note, I would just offer that, like, we are getting approached by more and more organizations every day and companies that are trying to build something different. And I need to learn more about this, but I think that part of what we have started to do with regard to technology is just try to, like, learn about those spaces and maybe even create some kind of lab or just coalition, and other people can speak better to that. But just the good news is there is a major wave of people who are trying to fix that, like to create something different and better. And so maybe one of them will succeed.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's essentially the direction that we're going in the work that we're starting to do here at Brave Angels with Tristan Harris and the Center for Humane Technology. I mean, it's nascent, but the Council for Trust and Social Cohesion, and probably go back and double check the order of the words I'm using here, because I'm always forgetting my acronyms. But the idea is to create relationships that put folks who are innovating constructive means of communication in the real world in touch with people who are in a position to affect the culture of digital and social media design. And so, I do think that there's a lot to be learned, not just from our field and movement broadly, but April, from your work in particular, possibly in those contexts. So you may yet wind up running the digital public square, April. Our conspiracy marches on. The other thing I was going to say is that, a lot of folks on the right are disappointed in Elon. I mean, I'm just responding to Monty's point about people on the left fleeing Twitter because it sucks. But to Karen's earlier point, I've read a number of people who say that, hey, Elon Musk's real commitment to free speech, you can test that by whether or not he's willing to have Alex Jones on the platform, whether I like Alex Jones or not, right? Kanye West is gone now too, after his recent remarks. I don't know if you want to talk about Kanye this episode, but all the same, it's a wild landscape. And I think the thing that's going to matter is, yes, a commitment to free speech, but also an affirmative commitment to developing the practices and approaches by which we can actually effectively and empathetically sort of communicate with and humanize each other again. And that requires a lot more than just lifting up the floodgates. It requires real intentionality in the culture of design. And so maybe
Well, John, let me put you on the hot seat. That's my privilege as host. If you were Elon Musk, what would you do with Alex Jones and Kanye West?
Well, I think that it's tough. Twitter is not. A lot of people feel that Twitter and other social media companies constitute the public square. But these are privately owned companies. If I had a privately owned company, I think I would be kind of loath to have Alex Jones on that platform. At the same time, I think that Alex Jones is very much entitled legally to say, the things he says, short of saying things that, perhaps are actively inviting potentially, violence and so forth. That's part of the problem with Alex Jones, I think, is not just that he's, maybe wrong or controversial, but that, he may be sort of insightful and so forth, in terms of inciting, right? Certain behaviors. And, we're all at least somewhat familiar with the Sandy Hook episode. So he's paying out the wazoo financially for that. But my instinct is to say, no, I don't think I would have Alex Jones on my platform. But I do also think that Alex Jones is so far out in comparison to where the vast majority of Republicans and conservatives are on the right. We may be able to come up with analogous examples on the left, that I think that you could have a social media platform that works well as a space in which we can have the conversations we need to have. Now, I might have a different answer if I felt truly confident that we had sort of a schematic for hard conversations that could work as well on Twitter as what we have in Braver Angels on the ground and in our workshops and programs. And I think it may be possible to innovate something like that. But I would need to have confidence that we have that kind of an effective toolkit available, on a social media platform to make me comfortable saying that we really are just going to let anybody on here, because the system and the design, the culture is such that it's going to mitigate, even some of the, worst offenses and worst dangerous kinds of expressions or what have you. But in the absence of that, I don't know. It's hard for me to quite go that far.
Yeah, I think that's a nuanced answer. Well, let me now turn the discussion to.
I always know I've said something deep when Kieran sits there for a second and goes, that's how he punctuates the real good stuff, I've noticed.
Yeah, you earned that one, John.
Thank you.
I was gonna say that turning the discussion to the state of American politics, 6 months ago or so, it seemed like President Biden was kind of dead in the water in some ways. His approval rating was tanking. His domestic agenda was gridlocked in Congress. And most observers said the Democrats were going to get trounced in the midterms. There was going to be a red wave, a red tsunami. Republicans were going to add dozens of seats in the House and take back the Senate. Fast forward to where we are now, it seems that Biden's in a strengthened position. He was able to accomplish a lot on the domestic policy front, including some bipartisan breakthroughs on infrastructure and actually, believe it or not, some limited legislation on guns. And he was also able to pass his massive Inflation Reduction Act when he was able to finally bring Senator Joe Manchin on board, which included a lot of top policy priorities for Democrats, including, spending and tax breaks for climate legislation and helping us move toward renewables. And then, of course, in the midterm election, Democrats did a lot better than a lot of people thought they would. I think Republicans only gained 6 House seats, so they now have a very narrow majority. And Democrats actually added a seat in the Senate. There are a lot of theories as to why the Republicans performed less well than people thought, but it does seem that we're in a bit of a different space now than we were. So I'd like to open up the floor to Gabby or anyone else to kind of give their thoughts on how the year evolved politically, both in terms of the balance of power and why Biden seems to be doing better, or why Republicans did worse than people thought, or also how the state of play has maybe changed when it comes to the issue of polarization. Are people more divided or less divided, or does things really seem the same?
I feel like you're throwing Gabby a hard fastball for her first time up on the podcast front, but go ahead, Gabby. I want to hear from you.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think it's a fair point, John. It is a big question. I mean, I think with the thing that really comes to mind for me, and this is really just anecdotal based on my direct peer group of, I'm from Michigan, I'm from a swing state, and I have a lot of friends there who were never interested in politics, were never felt politically engaged, never felt particularly affected by politics. And I will say, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that was something that I can say personally, maybe just woke up some of my friends and made them feel like, oh gosh, like these things actually do affect our lives day to day, especially in Michigan, because we just in the midterms voted on Prop 3. We didn't have abortion wasn't legal in Michigan once Roe v. Wade was overturned. There was some technicalities that Governor Whitmer had worked with at the time, but they had just gotten it written into the Michigan Constitution. But I know that was like the big issue. I mean, in terms of Biden specifically, it's interesting. We were kind of talking about this before we went on. And I mean, I say this as someone who voted for Biden. I don't notice him sometimes day to day. Like, and I have a hard time.
Damn.
I have a hard time like mustering up really strong feelings in either direction. And even, Karen, when you're going through the legislation that's gotten passed, I'm curious, like how many people were really having that in mind when they were going into the polling, when they were going into the voting booth and during the midterm. So, I'm curious. I'm honestly curious to hear from everyone else. I can say anecdotally from my direct friend group, I don't know how much it was Biden as much as it was the abortion issue.
Yeah, I'll say real quick to your point about you don't notice him every day. I think that's good. I mean, the last president was distracting us in so many ways with a lot of reactions and in my view, harsh, actions. Even if you agreed with his politics, he was sucking up a lot of air in the room. And I think making it hard to have conversations on substantive issues because it was a personality around him. So I, for one, think it's really good that Biden is more of a behind the scenes kind of a person. It makes me think of my personal view on leadership is about a good leader helping everyone else bring their best, helping the gears move and helping everything turn together and turn well. I'm not saying Biden is a great leader on all those fronts, but I do believe that the fact that he is such a sharp contrast as himself being the center of everything is a good thing. And I like that. I know that for the midterms, things like the economy and inflation, all kinds of those big issues, are and should be at the center. And I think they're still at the center, and we're still doing a pretty bad job in the mainstream talking about it well. The economy is a really complex and complicated issue. It's easier to talk about other things, but I do think it's one of the most important things for Americans to try to understand and to connect with each other around. Things like the class divide is one of the toughest divides. So anyway, I know that Biden and the Democrats, have their ideas on how to address all of that. Republicans and conservatives have their ideas. I'd really love to see the best ideas, and I don't know what those are. So for me, a good leader is one that is able to step back and try to help others figure out, hey, we've got a country with growing wealth inequality and, jobs and inflation kind of out of control. What can we do? I don't want the team in power to say, we're just going to put our guys on it and not care about anything else.
Yeah, I have to admit, I agree. I was working at the New York Times when for David Brooks when Trump was in office primarily, and it was exhausting. Man, the mental health of all the reporters that I knew at the Times and everywhere else was just like not the best, because when and frankly, the folks in the administration who I was friends with too, who some of them I might find out that I got fired via Twitter, but actually, I agree about the no news is good news in a way, or no, the just not having the circus is really nice. That said, I am nervous about two things. The first is I think the balance of power among the different branches of government has been out of whack for a long time. Too much power in the executive. And it still is out of whack. And the Supreme Court has been politicized for a long time too. But the Roe overturn, which I support, was also a manifestation of that. And basically, I think the legislature is, shirking its duty. But I think that the Roe overturn is a major. That's one of those things from this year that will still matter next year and in 10 years. And So I expect, as I think about how conversations play out across the country, I think that the fact that the abortion war is now going to the states is really consequential. And so I think that it will do interesting things to national politics to have that not be necessarily the main wedge issue. Won't be an issue, but that's a big shift. And then the other thing that I would offer is that the midterms, man, so I was happy and unhappy about the midterms. I think that the fact that, so I'm a never Trump Republican, right? And so I was pleased to see people like Carrie Lake lose, but I didn't want that to mean that the Democrats won. And that's sort of the function, the nature of being in our position right now is I cannot wait for the Republican Party to have a reasonable, coherent, solid, traditional, approach and set of candidates. And so my hope is that the midterms, the defeat of a lot of those folks will send the Republican Trumpy direction, because I think it's fundamentally not related to conservative values. The sort of sorry, I'm going to turn off my video because apparently my Wi-Fi is weak. I want to see a party that actually supports and represents conservative values in a way that is not so histrionic that that we can't even figure out what those values are. And so my hope is that, and what I will say is that, again, I live in DC, and so I have a lot of friends in this sort of sphere. Everybody's trying to be the next Republican Party right now. And that's actually great because a lot of them have good ideas. The party did need a shakeup. And so although I do not like how the actual literal balance of power has turned out, I do hope that the consequence will be that we move towards a Republican Party that is once again responsible, legitimately conservative, and more coherent.
And does your gut tell you, April, that the Roe v. Wade decision contributed to Republicans' poor performance in the midterms relative to expectations? I ask because, for example, I saw that when Kansas, which is a reliably Republican state, put the constitutional amendment to ban abortion up for a referendum, it failed by 20 points, which suggested to me that perhaps at least outright bans of abortion did not really command majority support, maybe even in red states. So do you think that was part of it, that it kind of motivated Democrats to come out and vote, and maybe even some Republicans were not as enthusiastic as people might have thought?
Well, there are two things to say about that. The first is that abortion, I wasn't actually that surprised that an outright ban failed, because if you just listen to the news media, you would think that half the country thinks there should never be abortion ever, and the other half think it should be at drive-thrus, right? But that's actually totally not how that issue has polled lately, or more or less ever. And so the vast majority, or well, a majority anyway, according to polls of Americans, think that it should be somewhere in the middle. And so I don't think that actually represents that much change, that referendum result. What I do think is that, of course, it resulted in higher motivation for Dems to come out and less motivation for Republicans. I know a lot of single issue voters who are abortion voters. And one of the things that I think will be from a sort of crass political perspective, unintended consequence of overturning Roe is that, there are a lot of particularly religious voters who have more complex views on social welfare and who might like to see, for example, an increase in the minimum wage or different ways the government can help out marginalized poor people, but they were voting on abortion. And so now that that's gone, I think there's the potential for an interesting shakeup that I hope actually better reflects what a lot of those religious voters believe is actually right for government.
Let me just say really quick, I think that the Republicans, wasn't so much that the Democrats won, I think the Republicans beat themselves more than anything, which, somewhat aligns with what April was saying. I mean, there were two big winners at the end of the midterms. One was Joe Biden, and the other was Ron DeSantis, right? You had a legitimate red wave in Florida. Ron DeSantis's Republican Party crushed it in Florida. And, Ron DeSantis, whether you love him or hate him or stand somewhere in between, he's built up what politically is a pretty strong record in terms of his response to what was the biggest issue for so many people, which was COVID and lockdowns and so forth. He's clearly taken sides in the culture war sorts of issues, but that hasn't really defined his brand, I think, more than his actual sort of material performance as governor, and within the party, being somebody who's presenting himself as a rational individual who's going to fight the fight that, mainstream Republicans and conservatives believe in, while also not presenting himself as a complete and total sort of, egomaniac at various points. And so, he kind of just did the basics, right, politically speaking, and he won big, whereas the Republicans who tended to lose were Republicans who were championing sort of, the claims about stolen elections, who were basically Donald Trump sort of handpicked folks, and in some cases, people who didn't really have much political experience or standing in the places where they were running. You have Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker in Georgia, and so forth. And those candidates fell flat. It does seem that in conventional terms, the Democrats should have suffered big time in the midterms. And I think what that might mean is that people may get the impression that because they didn't, that Joe Biden is a very strong president politically. I really don't think that he is. His approval rating has been low, I do think that there's some good in the fact that he's not always sucking all the air out of the room, but it also suggests that, strong leadership is not necessarily the thing that people associate with him, And so, we look towards 2024 with the prospect of, I think, Joe Biden, who's, I think, politically speaking, generally sort of a weak president. That's not a personal attack on him. It's just politically speaking, I think that's true. Versus potentially a Ron DeSantis who is ascendant in the Republican Party, but who still has to worry about President Trump being in a position to basically undermine any Republican nominee who might possibly defeat him in a presidential primary. And all of that, to me, is a recipe for serious chaos in the body politic. So, the stability that may seem to be a product of the 2022 midterms, I think is something that could evaporate and probably will evaporate fairly quickly as we look forward. Not to be a Debbie Downer or anything.
Totally. Well, on an up note, so I hear you, but fortunately we have a great solution to your Debbie Downerism, John. Okay. And that is, it is time for our special lightning round with our newest, media leader, Gabby Timmis. And so, yeah. So I, as the, self-appointed Braver Angels chair of, I almost want to say hazing, but maybe that's not allowed that I actually say that out loud. But what we're going to do is we're going to go around and we're going to ask Gabby questions, and each person gets to ask her 2 questions, and I will model. They should both be very serious, as you'll see, but in different ways. The first one, Gabby, my first question for you is, why are you excited about this job? Like this new leadership you're taking on in Braver Angels? What do you want to do with it? Like, what can we expect?
Well, first of all, I want to say, I'm very grateful that we're on camera so you guys can see me turn bright red. I remember last year I was in grad school and we'd have Zoom classes, and whenever I'd speak, I could see my face just turn bright red on camera. So, But to your question, April, like, what am I really excited about? I mean, so in January, I started as a position as a field reporter. And in that position, I was really tasked with finding the stories on the ground in Braver Angels and writing about them. And now I'm moving into this position as the director of social media. And I actually kind of see that as partially an extension of the work that I'm doing, that it's just kind of taking a new form. It's bringing these stories farther and wider and through our social media channels. But the thing that I really go back to is about the stories that we tell ourselves as Americans in our country. just something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that I feel like as a country, we're in this period of self-loathing that we really speak poorly about ourselves. And I think about that on an individual level. You know, if I woke up every single day and I was like, I'm a horrible person because of either where I've been or where I'm going, and, you know, how would I expect myself to move forward in any meaningful way? So what I hope to do with our social media is find an avenue to tell better stories about our country, because I get the privilege, and I have for the past year gotten the privilege of speaking to so many incredible Americans every single day who are making serious differences. And, you know, as we talk about and we bemoan a lot, our media isn't showing all of those stories. And we need to complexify, you know, the narrative of the United States. We're an incredible country. We're a big country. We're a diverse country. There's a lot of amazing work being done on the ground, I think, especially in Brave Angels. And so I'm excited to be able to tell those stories to a larger audience.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, so for my second very serious question, tell us a story about what kind of kid you were like. So like, we're like, I don't know, 8 or something, like what would we have seen if we saw little Gabby? And if there's an anecdote that illustrates it, that would be especially delightful.
Okay, that's a great question. So I think one like core piece of my identity is that I'm the youngest of 4. So I have 3 older siblings. We're all 2 years apart. And so I have 2 older brothers and an older sister. So I think, you know, that gave me a bit of scrappiness, that I was like a little fighter, a little school kid. I had no fear about running my mouth, which I probably should have had more, because, you know, I had 2 older brothers and an older sister to protect me. Probably a good example of that was in 7th grade, I heard that there was a mom who was saying something unkind about me to the other moms. So as a 12-year-old, I called her up, and I called, and this, you know, it was a landline. So I called her home phone number. I remember her daughter picked up, and I said, "Hi, can I speak to your mom, please?" And I just heard a bunch of rumbling in the background, and then they hung up. And then I called back again, and I said, "No, I'd like to speak to your mom. She's saying something not kind about me." And then I literally proceeded to get on the phone with the mother and try to talk to her about it. I mean, granted, I think within 3 minutes I started crying and like completely crumbled, but I at least came in with like the audacity and the courage to take up that conversation. So maybe, April, you could say I've never shied away from a difficult conversation, which is—
There we go. Yep. Brave, even in 7th grade. That's quite impressive. Love it. Okay. John, 2 serious questions.
Oh, no. I'm nervous.
Well, I can go to Monty first if you'd rather.
No. I need to take my medicine. Let's go.
Okay, let's hear it.
John, you're
I'm sorry,
asking
you're
2
supposed to ask
questions.
Gabby.
Well, I'm asking 2 questions.
Yes.
Well, Gabby, now that I've had 2 seconds to prepare, who is someone who inspires you?
Who is someone that inspires me? You know, I will say one of the first people that come to mind, this is the last person who would want me to name him, but I'll say my boyfriend's dad really inspires me. He's a person who, he's very shy and very sweet and has done incredible work in Poland, helping refugees from Ukraine. And he's just a person where there's stuff going on, he wants to be at the front lines of it. And, but he's, again, the first person to shy away from, you know, in times in the past when he's been given awards and stuff like that, he never wants to be a part of it. He's always just doesn't want the recognition. But he's a person, like when I go back to what is leadership and what is the type of person that I want to be, I really think about him, because again, he really is just grounded in like just doing the good work and moving ahead and making the, you know, most positive impact he can. So he was the first person that came to mind.
And what is the skill or ability that you have worked hardest on in your life and career?
I think the skill that I've worked hardest on is really, you know, to take example from, you know, Monica's work, like curiosity and really trying to understand people. Like I think there's a term that I learned last year it talks about listening musically to people. So it's not just in a conversation you're going tit for tat, but like really trying to see what the notes are under what someone's saying and really trying to dig into that. And I think that's something I've tried to do, and I've had the privilege of being able to do that again, from a political perspective, I have so many different types of people in my life. My dad's libertarian, my mom's center left, my best friend is, my cousin and best friend is progressive. Like I have all these different people in my life that represent all these different identities. So it's really such a privilege to me to try to like dig in and really understand where they're coming from. So that's something I think I've continued to try to hone, and hopefully we'll continue.
Listening musically, that's like something I would have said. That's beautiful.
Totally.
Gabby, that's the highest praise you could ever receive from John.
I mean,
All right, money.
Okay.
Over to you.
Oh my gosh. All right. Let's start with, this is Braver Angels. We're not about changing people's minds on the issues. We're about changing people's minds about each other across big divides. What is something you have changed your mind about?
I think, honestly, even just the issue of the importance of talking to people who disagree with you. There have been times in my life where, my dad said that he was going to vote for someone differently than me. And I said, okay, then I can't talk to you about it. I can't talk to you until after the election. A lot of the work that we do in Braver Angels, when I think about myself, I'm not like, oh, I'm a great example of this. I'm like, I'm just as much of have been part of the problem. And that's what really moves me forward in this work. It's everything that I'm critical of, I'm guilty of. And so I think that mind shift was like the biggest thing for me. And again, like I am a naturally curious person, so it didn't really feel in line with me to kind of shut people out and shut them down. But it's something that I still did, and something that I think I've come to see is, not productive at its best, and it can be really painful at its worst.
Yeah. Okay, and the second one is, what movie could you watch over and over again?
Oh, When Harry Met Sally. Easy. That's such an easy one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
Great answer.
That's a good one. Okay.
I love Nora Ephron. I love When Harry Met Sally. I love New York City.
Yeah. All right. Now I have to see it again because it's been a very long time and it's such a classic. All right. Over to Kieran.
Good judgment. Yeah, Kieran, your turn.
Cool. My question would be, as you sort of continue your journey with Braver Angels from a volunteer to a part-timer to now a full-time staffer, kind of what excites you most about the future and sort of stepping into that new leadership role?
I think that one thing I, try to keep in mind is like, we've gotten such great traction politically and in academia and all these different spaces that like, how can we make this cool? Like, how can we make this the culturally cool thing to do, is to have these spicy, interesting, nerve-wracking conversations? Because even like, I often think about stuff, for a long time, I really only cared about politics. I was like so hyper-focused on what was happening politically. And then in the past couple of years, again, even just speaking to my girlfriends, I have, there's 14 of us that are friends from high school still, and we talk every single day. So there are people I often bounce ideas off of. And a lot of them, when I try to talk about political stuff, they weren't really engaged. But then suddenly something would happen in pop culture that sometimes, as we were talking about with Elon, had undertones of something political, but that's what would really activate them. So I started thinking about like, these pop culture and cultural issues. And so I wonder, when I'm kind of thinking about Braver Angels and I work, I'm also looking to influencers and young women and what are they saying and how are they feeling? And I'm thinking about how we can kind of permeate some of those spaces, maybe the places we haven't gone to the extent that we want to. So that's one thing that I have in mind.
100%. Last question. You told us before the call, and I'm revealing this to our audience, that your spirit animal is a centaur. What is your spirit plant?
Oh my gosh. Well, my spirit plant, I mean, my middle name is Rose. And, so there's that. And as I shared with my 7th grade anecdote, I still do have my thorns. So maybe I'd be a rose.
Well, my middle name is Justice, so that's definitely my spirit value. And I'm really glad we were able to do that lightning round to give our audience a chance to get to know you. And I think also for us, that was great to hear. And I know this probably will be the first of many podcasts. So last but not least, as I mentioned, and I don't think we're going to have time to discuss this today, but we will in a future podcast, Braver Angels is gearing up for a national convention in Gettysburg right after July 4th. It's going to be big. It's going to be bad. It's going to be brave. And you're going to hear a lot more from us about it. But if you're curious now, you can go to our homepage, scroll down, and you can even apply to attend. Does not mean you'll necessarily be accepted, but you can apply to attend. We want everyone to apply. And I also just want to wish everybody happy holidays. It's been a crazy year. It's been a crazy couple years. And here's to hoping that 2023 brings all of us some joy and some comfort. So with that, I say goodbye to the audience with my thanks to the four of you for joining us. My thanks to our listeners for sending feedback. I love your compliments and your complaints. It's often very funny, so I appreciate it. Maybe one day I'll share some of my all-time favorite emails I've received in response to the podcast, do a little mailbag episode. But until then, happy holidays and much love from the Braver Angels crew. Peace.